Good evening. We have been talking about rebooting India as the economy comes out of a lockdown. One sector which is tasting the best of both worlds is pharma and healthcare. While there's been a big boost up because of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, there is also a sector that is heavily dependent on imports from China. So how can healthcare and pharma be Atmanirbhar? That's what we'll seek to find out in this special edition of Rebooting India. I'll be joined by four very special guests who will be joining us through the course of this broadcast. Adar Poonawalla is the CEO of the Serum Institute. Samina Hamid is the Executive VP at Cipla. Shobana Kamineni, Executive VP at Apollo Hospitals. And Vishwaprasad Alva from Skyna Technologies. They're an indigenous company that's building ventilators, something that Indian companies didn't do till a few months ago. But let me start with Adar Poonawalla of the Serum Institute, who've tied up with the Oxford vaccine trials that are happening right now, the ChAdOx1. Thanks very much, Adar Poonawalla, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. Where do you stand in this global hunt for the vaccine against COVID? We know that you have tied up, the Serum Institute has tied up with Oxford University for the ChAdOx1, which I believe just a few days ago has moved into phase 2 of the trials. Bring us up to speed with where things are as of right now.
So, what wasn't known until recently is that India produces more than 70% of the world's vaccines. And that's really come to light, and the world is looking to India. No matter which vaccine is developed, eventually an Indian company will make a large portion of that vaccine for the globe. So I hope one of the vaccines work out. I certainly hope it's one of ours. But we'll be equally delighted if somebody else also, comes to the market sooner than later, and we'd be happy to make it. And that's why we've already made 3 partnerships. We are in the process of closing another 2. Let's see where that goes. And I think, we'll stop at about 5 different partnerships.
Adar, if you could just explain to our viewers, and a lot of our viewers have been asking this question since the pandemic began, creating a vaccine should be fairly easy. It's not a complicated medical procedure, as it were. And this is an, influenza-like illness. It's not like HIV/AIDS. It's not like a complicated disease, as it were. And we've seen variants of this with SARS and MERS and other, influenza-like diseases in the past. Why is it so difficult, though, to arrive at a vaccine for COVID-19?
Well, normally it takes 3 to 5 years to make a vaccine, both with the regulatory approvals and the safety testing in animals, then humans, and then the efficacy testing, the long-term proof that the vaccine is giving you that protection. So that typically takes that much time. So having said that, we're trying to compress that, and the world is trying to compress that in a matter of a year or 2 years.
All right.
So we don't want to skip anything. It is very challenging to rush things, but we don't want to compromise on safety and efficacy.
Okay.
So those are the areas which we'll have to look out for, and we don't want to make any vaccine that's not going to protect you. So we're just going carefully on that. And as I said to some others, by October, November, we should know whether the AstraZeneca Oxford product will be,
efficient
safe
enough.
and efficacious.
All
I
right.
think it's already pretty safe because we've injected more than 1,000 people in the UK. AstraZeneca and Oxford has done that, and we're going to start a study in India shortly, in about a month's time, to do that as well. So we'll have some Indian data as well.
Okay, let me now go across to Shobana Kamineni as well as Vishwaprasad Alva, who are both joining us on the broadcast. We'll also be joined by Samina Hamid of Cipla, who's also joining us on the broadcast just now. Shobana Kamineni, we're talking about rebooting India, and you've heard the Prime Minister's call for an Atmanirbhar Bharat. Interestingly, the healthcare sector and Apollo itself, I believe just recently in the Q4 results that you declared, you've had a 168% jump in profit. Although there are some concerns about, people opting out of surgeries, particularly elective surgeries, non-essential surgeries. Do you think one of the upsides of this COVID-19 pandemic could be that, forget about, bottom line and forget about, profits of healthcare industry, but at least whether it is policymakers, whether it is individuals at large, there will be far more emphasis, far more importance on healthcare and education, two sectors that we've always relegated to the back end.
Hey, thanks for that. Just a clarification: the profits came mostly from the sale of our insurance asset. So I think that healthcare today, it's in this phenomenon where we're just about like the rest of the country, struggling, fighting for a greater cause. But having said that, I'd like you to think that we spend 8 to 9% of GDP on defense.
Yeah.
This is a war now that we're fighting, and our country spends 1.5%.
Yeah.
So I do think that this is a clarion call that more money needs to be invested in healthcare. That's one point. And I have just one more point to tell you, that when IFC did a study of Apollo Hospital, and they said Apollo Hospital directly might employ 60 to 75,000 people, but they actually have provided jobs for more than 68 lakh people. And I think that is the delta, that's the multiplier, that healthcare can create jobs at a time when we really need well-paying jobs that matter. So these are the two.
Okay.
These are the points I'm going to leave you with.
Let me go across to Samina Hamid. And Cipla has announced, of course, the manufacturing of the generic version of remdesivir, which up until now at least seems to be the most promising drug against COVID-19. Just tell us a little bit more about this. How hopeful are you? How soon can this hit the market? And also, I believe that the price is somewhere around 5,000 per vial. Could you just walk us through the rationale behind that? Because that would put that out of reach for many average Indians, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so remdesivir is a drug that we in-license from Gilead, and this product should be in the market between over the next 7 to 10 days. This has shown to be very efficacious in patients who are in a critical stage of the illness, and it's definitely shown a lot of benefit on people who are on a ventilator, and where their time in a critical care unit has been reduced from 15 days to 11 days.
Why is it that, we've had this back and forth about HCQ, even with remdesivir, the tests are still going on. And I asked Ada this as well. At the end of the day, this is an influenza-like illness. Why is it so hard to find a cure, whether it's a vaccine or a drug, to treat COVID-19?
So the illness has only been around for 6 months, and these are all repurposed drugs that all the companies are trying to use and find enough scientific data to show that these repurposed drugs can be used for COVID-19. So none of them are specifically for COVID-19. They've all been repurposed, whether it's favipiravir, which was for influenza, or remdesivir, which was actually created for the Ebola.
Let me go across to Vishprasad Alva. He runs Scanray Technologies, which of course is now into manufacturing of ventilators. As per the PM CARES fund, they will be manufacturing something like 50,000 ventilators. Before the pandemic began, Mr. Alva, I think all of India probably had somewhere around less than 50,000 ventilators all across the country. But now your one company is manufacturing 50,000 ventilators. Again, it comes back to, it's a dovetail from the question that I asked Shobna Kamineni. In a country like India where health and education were not top priority, not top billing, do you believe that companies like yours, because of this COVID-19 pandemic, are now putting the focus squarely back on health, certainly as one pillar of our economy?
Scanray started manufacturing ventilators in 2014 and predominantly for the private sector and for exports. It was during the pandemic that we got attention from the government and tremendous help from Bharat Electronics and DRDO to scale from a batch size of 5,000 to 50,000. It's a tremendous growth, 10x growth in manufacturing capability because of the size of the public sector and capability of DRDO to indigenize certain critical components. In the medtech sector, about 90% of the critical equipments were imported, and when Scanray started commercial production in 2012, having acquired Larsen & Toubro's medical division and then Precol Technologies and a couple of companies in Italy, Netherlands, and US. We grew from a very small size to become the largest medtech company, but still compared to the big MNCs that are leading the medtech sector, we have a long way to go in establishing the supply chain technology capabilities, and it's the best model for India to scale is a partner and complement model.
Mr. Alva, can you tell us, before the pandemic began, like I said, we were under 50,000 ventilators across the country.
Yes.
What would be the ballpark figure right now? And do you believe that's enough for a country where, the cases are only increasing? We're around the 5 lakh mark right now. Clearly, there will be a lot more demand going forward for ventilators.
Yeah, we are estimating a requirement of about 2 lakh ventilators for the country and another 5 lakh export potential if we are able to manufacture.
Let me go back to Adar Poonawalla and talk about the vaccine, because there's huge interest around this vaccine, Adar. Even if one were to be found, and let's say, it's the AstraZeneca one, it's the one that you're involved in, perhaps by the end of the year, is it, though, possible that this virus itself could mutate into something else? We've seen similar, viruses in the past mutate, sometimes into a weaker form of itself, sometimes into a stronger form of itself. And how might that play out?
Well, we hope that doesn't happen. We're working on another candidate which will have a very broad protective spectrum because it's using the whole virus and a live attenuated one of that with codogenics. So I think when that comes about in 2 years, our hope is that any mutations that may have happened will, not matter very much because you're getting the full protection. Having said that, the scientists right now feel with the Moderna, the AstraZeneca product, one of the Chinese candidates as well, any existing mutations are not that severe to make a difference, and we don't need to go back to the drawing board on that, which is good news for now. But that could, as you rightly said, change very quickly, and we're addressing that with our second wave of vaccines, as you will. There's this first wave where you've got all these guys like Moderna, AstraZeneca, the Chinese, and one or two others in the West and in India. And then we'll see, with the second wave, what happens.
Okay, let me go back to Shobhana Kamineni. One of the concerns in the healthcare sector has been around, because so much of the focus has been on COVID, there are reports that, whether it is elective surgeries, whether it's non-essential treatment, are all being put off by patients. How much is that affecting your business? And also, I want you to talk about, India has been a huge base for medical tourism, particularly for the South Asian region. People from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, all coming to India for medical tourism. That, of course, has been completely abruptly halted because of the COVID-19 and the travel ban. Talk to us about both of these areas, please.
So once the lockdown opened, the designated hospitals that we have, now all our beds are not used for COVID. All our hospitals are not dedicated COVID hospitals. We do have other hospitals that are doing the regular work. But during the lockdown time, it was very difficult for people to get there. And we realized that when it opened up, the seriousness of people that came to us in terms of the cancer, in terms of some of the emergencies, is much higher. So India's almost like, you put a pressure cooker on the, that lid, you put it down of a bubbling health crisis.
Okay.
So this is going to come out, and I think that that's one. So India is not that much healthier. Just because they're staying at home, it doesn't mean that they're that much healthier. So they do need access to care, and we have to remember this all the time. The good thing is that digital health has helped a lot.
Yeah.
They use teleconsults and what we're doing in terms of delivering medicines. So groups like us have swiftly pivoted to be able to bring digital health and actually bridge a lot of that gap.
Sure.
But it has not helped in terms of medical tourism. And this is something, medical value travel. I think a lot of Indian hospitals were getting patients from around the world. We should bring that back when we can.
Sure.
It's significant.
All right, Samina Hamid, one of the areas that we've been talking about, and particularly so because of the last few weeks, this whole China situation, is how can we reduce our import dependence on China? And one of the areas where, one of the industries where India is really dependent on China happens to be pharmaceuticals. I believe about 70% of our APIs come from China, which has only increased in the last few years. Why this sort of almost imbalance, if I can use that word, in terms of dependence on China, and what can be done to change that?
Yeah, so you're right. 70% of APIs and raw materials come from China, and there is a massive dependence. And it's just about being cost competitive. The Chinese have very large volumes; they're extremely cost competitive, and they also have a lot of export incentives that help them further reduce the costs of their export. So, India has just been exceedingly dependent just from a cost factor, but the government is now recognizing this, and there's a huge stimulus to reinvigorate the domestic API business in India. And there's a huge stimulus push from the government, whether it's from funding, whether it's creating API parks, accelerating the environmental approvals, the regulatory environment. So I think all of this will give this massive push for India to start being self-reliant. But this is not a short-term fix. This is more a medium to long-term fix. So in the short term, we will continue to be dependent on that supply chain from China.
Mr. Alva, what's interesting is, there was a time just 3 months ago when we were not making any PPE kits. We were not making any N95 masks. Today, India is making almost 4 lakh PPE kits on a daily basis. Your company is making 50,000 ventilators. The question is, can we extend this to other medical instruments and instrumentation as well? At the end of the day, there is an opportunity in healthcare that's been brought to the fore because of the pandemic. And companies like yours have shown that, yeah, we can manufacture, of course, to scale like the way the Chinese do. That might take some time, but surely we can. We have the capability to manufacture.
We manufacture about 50 products. Ventilator was one of the smallest segment for us prior to COVID. Surgical C-arms, X-ray diagnostic machines. We had anesthesia workstations. The problem with the Indian medtech sector is there's a supply chain issue that we have to address. An ecosystem that has to be created. We have software skills. We have a little bit of an issue with system knowledge and application skills, which has to be scaled up. But as a potential, yes, there is a $200 billion diagnostic imaging and.
Okay. All right. We'll try and go back to Mr. Alva as and when that link is established. But let me go back to Adar Poonawalla and talking about the vaccine. And you were talking about the first wave, and then potentially there could be a second wave as well. Whether it's from the West, whether it's the Chinese model, the point is at some point we will get a vaccine. The larger question, though, Adar, is how long before that's available in India at scale, and two, at a relatively affordable price, because, the Indian market is very price sensitive.
No, that's a very good question. Of course, it'll be at an affordable price because we're making it. We always have done that for all our vaccines. But to your question, when will everybody get it? I think, initially we're going to have just a few 100 million doses, which will go to the elderly, the immunocompromised, the healthcare workers, our heroes on the front lines, because they're really the ones at risk. You and I as healthy adults would probably get it last. And if you look at that time horizon with what we can make, I think probably this time next year or end of next year is probably when we're looking at covering the entire Indian population. Okay. I think anything sooner than that would be delusional for anyone to imagine that's going to happen. So we'll have to wait for the entire population of India for at least another year and a half, if not 2 years, to be covered. entirely.
All right. I'll give the final word to the two ladies, Samina Hamid and to Shobhana Kamineni. Shobhana Kamineni, many are asking how is this pandemic going to end? I mean, yes, we know that the vaccine will eventually be found, and eventually, when the vaccine is found, the pandemic might end. But before that, and as Adar was saying, he doesn't expect the vaccine to be found perhaps by, before this time next year. But eventually, how do these pandemics, how do these viruses, and we've seen variants of this in the past as well, how do they normally end?
I'm not a medical person. We're in the here and now of the fight phase, and we're seeing that there's so many of them are asymptomatic. Yeah. So anyone can not show it. So we think that a lot of the community is going to get it. The next thing is that thanks to people like Samina and Adar, that we have the capability to fight it much better. And the third is, don't expect India to be the most favored country for people to come to or to go, because while it might get out of Mumbai and Delhi and Hyderabad and Chennai, it'll start moving down into the villages. Mm-hmm. So we're in this phase, it's going to ebb and flow and rise, and we just have to understand it. But the good thing that Adar said is, and I'm hopeful, is that the immunocompromised and all the real people that need it will get it faster. You're going to get it this time next year. All the others will start getting it earlier, hopefully, because of all of them.
Samina, I'll give you the final word. Do you believe that we have in us, medical infrastructure-wise, pharmaceutical industry-wise, to be able to handle this disease, given the exponential rise we've had just in the month of June? We're now looking at 5 lakh cases. Do you believe that we have it in us to handle this virus till about this time next year, when Adar says we could potentially have a vaccine?
I think this is a tall ask for any country, and I think every government has been underprepared because no one has ever had to deal with this kind of pandemic. So I just say that, locking down early was good for India. It gave us a chance to boost our medical infrastructure, and it has been helpful. Yeah. I guess, but this is not going to be, we can't say that we've hit the peak. I think it's going to be more or less a plateau for India. There's going to be a massive amount of community transmission. And I think it's all about, creating civic sense, social distancing, people wearing masks, just changing cleanliness habits. I think all of this will work bottom up as we continue to provide medication, and hopefully Adar will have his vaccine, but all of this needs to come together. So it needs to be a bottom up civic sense education push. I think, infrastructure and healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and of course the vaccine. So this is going to be a massive partnership for India.
Sure. Samina Hamid, Shobhana Kamineni, Adar Poonawalla and Vishprasad Alva, thank you very much for joining us on this fascinating conversation, which is rebooting India, pharma and healthcare.